Now, if you think that background checks for guns are bad, and they are because of what they're going to do with it, how about a background check for your job? How about if the government had to okay your new job or had to know where you're working and when you're changing jobs? Well, that's exactly what is being proposed as part of this immigration bill. In order to save us from illegal immigration, they won't close the borders, they won't police the borders. Instead, what they're going to do is enact draconian measures on people who live in the United States, citizens who are in the United States. And part of this is E-Verify. And there was an article on InfoWars today from Ron Paul. He said, if you'd like the surveillance state, you're going to love E-Verify. He said, the mandatory E-Verify system requires Americans to carry a tamper-proof Social Security card. The law gives federal bureaucrats broad discretion in adding other biometric identifiers to the database. It also gives the bureaucracy broad authority to determine what features the tamper-proof card should contain. And he points out the day may come when you're not able to board an airplane or exercise your Second Amendment rights without being run through the E-Verify database. It's not outside the realm of possibility that personal health care information that will soon be collected by the IRS and shared with other federal agencies as part of Obamacare will also be linked to E-Verify systems. It's interesting, as we saw with Bilderberg. Well, as the surveillance state grows, the government believes that it needs to know every single aspect of your life. No detail, no matter how minute, is hidden from their view. But of course, we're not allowed to know anything about our masters. A good example of this is Obama's birth certificate. And we're going to be talking in our interview today with Mike Zullo. He's going to be talking about the detailed investigation into Obama's background and his birth certificate by Sheriff Arpaio's group. Now, you may think that E-Verify is something that isn't going to happen if the immigration bill doesn't pass. It has passed in the Senate. It looks like it will be blocked in the House, but actually it is already going into effect as of today in North Carolina and Georgia. Employers in North Carolina with 25 or more employees and in Georgia with 10 or more are now required to use E-Verify as of today, July 1st, 2013. Department of Homeland Security has been phasing it in without any legislative authority. Now, in North Carolina, they've been doing this going back to October of 2012. They put it in for employers with over 500 employees. Then in January, they reduced it to 100. Now today, July 1st, they take it down to 25 or more employees. Georgia started phasing this in back in January of 2012, and now, as of today, they are down to companies that only have 10 employees are required to send this information to Department of Homeland Security and the Social Security Administration whenever someone hires someone new. It has to be verified by the Department of Homeland Security. Now, what's really troubling about this, it would be bad enough if this was coming from the Department of Homeland Security. They'd be legislating by bureaucratic fiat. But actually what they're doing is they're getting these state legislatures like North Carolina and Georgia to do this for them. It's kind of like when the government goes in, when the FBI goes into Google or to Apple, a third-party provider, and says, we would like to get the information that you're holding on David, for example. And they turn that over and they say, well, we don't need to have a search warrant because it's being freely given to us by someone who's given the data and is just holding it. Well, that's essentially what you're having happen here at the state levels. As opposed to being a check on the balance of the federal government, as opposed to standing up for our constitutional rights, these state legislatures in Georgia and North Carolina, I used to live in North Carolina, and I know that when it comes to identity card legislation, North Carolina just rolls over for anything the federal government wants to do, and that's what they're doing here, and they're doing it in Georgia as well. So be aware if that is happening in your state, and be aware of what the implications are when every time you get a job, it's reported to Washington. And presumably Washington has a say-so as to whether or not you get that job. They can say there's a problem with your paperwork, or you might run into some kind of a bureaucratic snafu like a no-fly list. You might get a no-work list as well. That's in the future. That takes us to our quote of the day. It is from Kwame Nkrumah, a former Marxist leader in Africa. But he had an interesting quote. He said, "A state in the grip of neocolonialism is not a master of its own destiny. It is this factor which makes neocolonialism such a serious threat to world peace." Now, what he's calling neocolonialism, we would call gangster capitalism, the kinds of things that Cecil Rhodes did in Rhodesia, the kinds of things that the large multinational banks are doing to us in the first world today. They were just seeing it at that time in the colonial world, the third world. They were seeing it, and it was very brutish, it was very open, it was very naked aggression. It was a little bit more subtle when they did it in the Western countries. But now the gloves have come off, and we're seeing that iron fist there. But we call it the difference between gangster capitalism and true free market, competitive free markets. That's not what capitalism is. It's not gangster capitalism. It is a free market where you have private property and true competition, and that is what is being squished out. Now you can watch the InfoWars Nightly News streaming live as it happens for free.
Check it out at Infowars.com/show.